Hello, and welcome to Wisdom and Productivity, the podcast of Dr. Efraim Martinez. I am a principal in search of wisdom, and I have found productivity to be a great tool for success. Today, I have the great and distinguished honor of having with me Dr. Christopher Graves, who is the principal at Jordan Community School in Chicago Public Schools. He is also the editor of Graves Data Insights Substack, which focuses in summarizing research on AI in education. Dr. Christopher Graves, who are you?
Thank you. Thanks. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. I've always loved following your podcast, and everyone that you've had on has been very insightful for me as a learner. So I'm born and raised in the Detroit suburbs, much like the North Shore of Chicago. I always had a passion for doing something that makes an impact. And when my father showed me what it was like to be an attorney, I thought, that's not what I want to do. And I realized, well, my passion is in music. So I followed that passion, became a music teacher, taught in South Carolina and Indiana, and then eventually here to Chicago to be a little closer to, where I'm from, go home on the weekends if I want. And when I realized I can only do so much from my little corner of the universe as a teacher, but I can, impact the whole school as a school leader, I decided that's where I want to take my career. And so I've been in school leadership now for over a decade as a resident teacher leader, then resident principal, assistant principal, and I'm finishing my 6th year as principal now at my second school. So,
Wow, beautiful. So, walk us through your journey as an assistant principal and what lessons did you learn and you brought to the principalship?
yeah, I started as an assistant principal at Henry Elementary up in Network 1 in Chicago Public Schools with Juanwadio Gutierrez. And then I was at Curie High School, one of the biggest high schools in the state, down in the southwest side in Archer Heights with Dr. Allison Tingwall when she was principal there. And I think in both of those experiences, I learned a lot about the difference between management and leadership. I'm sure that resonates with anyone listening to this podcast. I think a lot about how management is, telling people what to do, checking off action items on a to-do list, making sure that the technical things that need to get accomplished are handled. And then when you get into a formal leadership role where you have, a professional title as assistant principal or something like that, you realize we go from doing the things to leading the things, right? We're like on a balcony, a level up. And I think, a good example is in my time at Curie, I did so much work around culture and climate. We went from being having the most arrests in the whole state. There were over 100 arrests the year before we got there as a team. And I say we, because I'm not taking credit for this work. I'm proud to have led the work. But what I learned was by the end of my 3rd year there, when we were celebrating how much we had transformed the culture there, when I was heading off to become a principal, we celebrated being an exemplary, supportive school in the designation of Chicago Public Schools. And when we celebrated it, there were over 100 people that we invited from within the school to the celebration. It was security officers, the disciplinarians who really restoratively and humanely managed behaviors, a number of teachers and different staff who over the years we had built this coalition of care and empathy, but yet firm structures around the building. And that's one of the most important lessons I learned is if you want to make that big systemic change, it takes coalition building, relationship building, trust building. And if I tell people to do something, they might do it because I'm their boss, I guess. But if I inspire them to do it and they feel like it's their mission, that's more sustainable. So I think that's probably the best lesson I've learned. And I've gotten to learn some from some amazing mentors in my career.
Beautiful. Chris, or members of the audience, for those who don't know, Henry is an elementary school and Curie is a high school. For those who are in the trenches and want to become assistant principals, what advice do you have, Chris, for them who are thinking, I don't know if I want to do elementary or if I want to do high school? How different are those roles in an elementary level and a high school level?
Yeah, I would say, I'm sure everyone has their own interpretation, because I've also taught K through 12th grade as a music teacher. Uh, at a big level, I'd say there's not much difference. You're supporting adults and you're supporting students either way, right? You've got student learning outcomes and student emotional and mental health needs as like the two big rocks, I always say. And anything else takes away from that. I try to minimize the impact of any operational needs so that we can focus on our two big rocks. That being said, the types of metrics that we're held accountable for at the elementary and high school level are very different. Oftentimes the culture in a school looks different, when you're spending time around 3 and 4 year olds versus 17, 18 year olds. I always say, since I've been at both levels so much throughout my career, when I'm at the elementary school, I miss the kind of deep, rich conversations you can have with young adults. And when I'm at the high school, I miss just that unconditional love of walking into a little kid classroom and kids just run over to you and like grab you by the leg and just want that warmth, because you try to build that relationship with kids at all ages. So either way, I'd say probably 80% of the skills, in my opinion, transfer, because really what you're doing is walking around a building going, what do I see that needs to improve? How can I leverage the opportunities at my fingertips in my locus of control to improve this? And what are the factors surrounding the building as well? But yeah, once you get into the weeds, I know a lot of folks, I'm sure we both do, that have said, oh, I could never be at the other level. And I think they would do incredibly well with some fine tuning and a listening tour and enough reflection on where their own growth areas are going to be, having not spent time in that space. I think we see a lot of people who have done it very successfully, gone to one level or the other.
Beautiful. I also I was perusing through your resume and I noticed you have a CBO license. Can you walk us through that experience? What made you go for it? What is it like to go for it? What advice do you have for those who want to attain it too?
Yeah. So for those that may not be familiar with the acronym, right? The Chief School Business Official. It's an additional license. Once you've gotten your principal license, there's the superintendent endorsement, chief school business official. In my doctoral program, it was about 3 years ago now, it was an option for us to go for it. It was, like any other program. Oh, only a few more courses. And I remember thinking, I think we all like, okay, another title, another badge or something like that, not for title's sake, but for the skills that come along with it. And first off, in Chicago Public Schools, we do a lot with financial management. I know, as you know, in the old budgeting system, I always joke, like they just hand you X number of millions of dollars and say, figure out how to run a school, with a decent amount of training, but a lot of autonomy at our fingertips. But CPS is its own structure. The state has its own school code, its own whole budgeting process. And so a couple of things. I thought, the more financial and operational management skills I learn, the better I get at my job wherever I'm at, whether I'm in Chicago Public Schools in a very different system or not. It's taught me a lot about just management, like building out a year-long structure, prioritizing different needs, advocacy. I feel like I've really fine-tuned my talking points. And even in these past few weeks, as CPS, as the state, and as different labor organizations between our union and the teachers union and the SEI, the service employees union for our support staff, have been finalizing budgets and negotiating contracts, I feel like I have a lot of experience in what would work and what won't, like a lot of articulate talking points around how budgeting works, how things could be different in our district or at the state level. Additionally, if I ever want to leave Chicago Public Schools and work in another district, I know it's apples and oranges how budgeting looks different for our schools in the city versus the districts outside the city. So I've always wanted to just keep my ear to the ground and continue to develop that skill set just to keep options open. And at the end of the day, I think a lot of us that have gotten graduate degrees and continue to be in school love learning. So anytime anyone says, hey, here's a program you could enroll in, like, oh, tell me more. I'm interested in that. So
beautiful. And of course, your doctoral program. Tell us about your experience, your journey. How did it change you?
Yeah, I can say, and I say this very vulnerably, as a cisgender heterosexual white man, I've never experienced like systemic oppression, discrimination myself. I grew up in a loving family, very wonderful community. I've seen it around me, right, in the world, everywhere I've worked. And I always say early in my career, I remember going from blue ribbon schools where I was raised and thinking kind of a meritocracy mindset of, anyone can, achieve what they want if they put their mind to it and put in the effort, to realizing how systemic inequities create barriers and hold people back.
Mm-hmm.
But I had this like fuzzy understanding, almost like, headlights in a fog, and thinking I'm missing something. I don't quite understand this. I don't have a lived experience that shows me things. And I didn't really know where to go. And, I tried to always pour my passion into my work, learn from amazing leaders. But I do remember when I got into that doctoral program, it was at Illinois State University, the EAF, Education Administration Foundations program. The professors I learned from in that program, just the social justice, critical race, critical whiteness. I mean, I'm very proud and thankful for everything I've had in life, but I also realize it's not fair. It's not equitable when others haven't had those same opportunities. And here I am now as a principal of a school with refugee, asylum seeker, newcomer families. Most of our families were not born in this country and came here not for upper middle class career opportunities, but came here seeking better opportunities, which, I mean, almost every single American's history did at some point as well. So my family did that from Italy. I see the same types of passion and interest in our families here. And so that doctoral program taught me why, taught me what, taught me how to really lean in on that and look through that lens. And so when it got to the culmination of writing a dissertation, the lens I look through, I think, anyone who's done that, you've got a theoretical framework, conceptual framework, right? You're looking through a lens of research to say, okay, if I take that perspective, what is the world telling me? What is this topic of interest telling me? And it not only did it deepen my knowledge of my topic, specifically on my dissertation was the school to prison pipeline. Students of certain racial backgrounds being, targeted in the system and pushed towards a life of crime or incarceration. You can unpack that, of course. But it also taught me about adult mindsets. It really deepened my knowledge about, because that's where I went with that topic, was what do I know about this and what do I want to know more? I want to know more about how I as a leader can support my staff in moving along this journey towards racial equity. And it taught me a lot about how to transfer that skill in other areas too. So it was an amazing experience. And I think, anyone else pursuing that, it just makes you a better leader at the end of the day. And if you find a program like I did that really helped transform, that like allegory of the cave, I felt like I was living in darkness, not really quite understanding the brightness of what's out there. And then I was helped to an awakening, armed with not only an aha, but also the skills and perspective to apply what I learned.
Beautiful. You mentioned allegory of the cave. That's like one of my favorites. I actually have it in my dissertation because I think my dissertation was on emotional intelligence and school principles.
Right.
And because I was failing terribly, and it was like I was knocking myself to the same wall constantly. I didn't realize, you can turn around and do it differently. So yeah, doctoral programs can be really transformational. Final trajectory question, Christopher. As you know, I am in my third principalship, and I know that the third time you do something, you just do it better. In your case, you're in your second principalship. What lessons have you learned that perhaps you're doing better now in your second principalship?
Yeah, actually, I love that you asked that. And I love that you kind of led with your own vulnerability about, reflecting on your first principalship too. I've done that a lot too. My first principalship was at a school, LaSalle Language Academy. It's a wonderful school in the Old Town neighborhood, right by, like I always say, right by the Second City Theater. If you've ever been to Chicago and you've gone to a comedy show there, it's like right behind there, tucked in the neighborhood. Citywide magnet. Dashe Rowland, I always love to give her a shout out, was my successor. We spent 2 years together with her as my AP, and she took over. And first off, I learned a lot from her. But I think I was reflecting on this a lot recently too. I think anytime I talk to someone like you who's been a principal in multiple places, there seems to be like an affinity we have where someone else said this to me first, and I carry it very personally, and I like to echo it to others who have been in our same journey. You take, like you said, all the lessons you learned in one, and you get to apply it somewhere else with almost like a fresh start, or at least a new opportunity in some ways, right? It's a different staff, it's a different culture. And hopefully your reputation is good enough from the first place that when people talk, because people always talk, they say the fair things about you, right? It's not all glowing and beautiful. We all get and should want the critical feedback as well. But hopefully, we've done enough to prove, okay, yeah, these are the things that make this person valuable for that community if they're coming in to be the principal. So I think one concrete example I've used a couple of times, it's a very vulnerable thing. I remember a teacher saying to me once, sometimes I leave your office feeling worse than when I got there. And I remember that, like, that punched me in the gut, but I needed to hear it. And I remember unpacking why. And I reflected on it with Dashe and a couple others who I knew I could get like some really deep feedback, go deeper on that. Why, right? And it's because I think, I could be wrong, but I think it's because I was raised in a family of attorneys. And in our family, that old adage of like, at the Thanksgiving table, we don't talk about religion or politics. Well, my family's the opposite. Because it's a family of attorneys, we bring up controversial topics. We'll argue for and against topics we don't agree with, because it not only is it fun for us, like, to push each other's thing. Oh yeah, you think that? Well, what about this? But it also deepens your perspective. If I'm against a topic, but I can argue that point, then I know how to counter that point as well. I know how to be prepared to counter that point. So a common example, if a teacher comes to me and says, hey, I was thinking of trying a new curriculum next year. And I go, well, have you done research on high quality curriculums? Have you thought of the impact on student learning? Have you thought about what professional development that's going to take? I might be getting to a yes. I might be asking all the right questions, but the way I've framed it and the way I've approached it, they're going to walk away going, he doesn't support me.
Mm-hmm.
He's just trying to shut me down. And I had to learn that. So now I'm not going to compromise on the non-negotiables of what it takes to like adopt a high quality curriculum. That's a very high threshold. You should have to do a lot of research. But now I go, I love your passion. I love your excitement for this. I can tell you want to do great things in your classroom. I'm on board. What can I do to support it? I'm opening the door wide, right? And then if I have to say no later, I go, after all this work we've done, we have to come to a conclusion. And I might pause at that point, but I'm going to ask those questions. I'm going to say, okay, great. Well, help me understand a little more. Where are we at with the professional development on it, right? I'm informing myself here, but I'm trying to bring them along and keep them excited. Like, I've got my pom-poms in the air. I'm cheering them along, but I'm still going to ask those questions framed the right way. And I think I could probably give you 10 examples of that, of things where I'm constantly going, okay, how did I mess this up in the past? Or how did someone not take something I said the way I intended it? How can I do that differently now in this opportunity here? And I'm really proud. I mean, I could share some examples of like the end
Beautiful.
of this
That's your
year
next
feeling good.
Substack article.
Yeah.
10 things that you can do better as a school
Uh,
principal. What a great reflection, and that's the whole purpose of this podcast, to what we see in social media is our final product. People don't see
yeah.
all the struggles and the lessons learned. For me, the example I always say is that I will tell a teacher after they will suggest something like that. I will say, but remember, students come first. And although it was coming from a good place, I never thought how the message was landing.
Yeah.
So the person was probably thinking, oh, you don't think I think students come first? Let me show you, right? And it
Yeah.
will create this unnecessary battle. So the way we say things and the way we open doors for possibilities can make a huge difference in the life of a school principal and a school.
Yeah. Great point.
Beautiful. Thank you, Christopher. So, like in Back to the Future, if you could go back to any of the positions you have held in the past, what will the Christopher of today tell the Christopher of back then?
Yeah. Without naming names, because it's not about, in one of my prior roles, I remember the person I worked closest with saying, I need you to be tough on these people. I need you to be tough on these people because they need to improve. And I took that in a literal sense. And I was tough on them. I wasn't like unprofessional, rude, cursing, anything like that. But I was really tough on a few key individuals who were, I think, in both of our analysis, like underperforming, not meeting their potential. And I remember at the end of that year that partner and I had a heart to heart, and we separated ways. And now we're close again. And I think it's because largely I've kind of owned up to like that. The way I was tough on them was it felt tough on them in a way where they felt lesser than, and it was intent versus impact 101, right? My intent was not to demoralize or beat them down. But I think of that analogy I remember from like a kid where the sun and the wind are trying to fight over a person who's got I forget the exact story, but wearing a coat and the wind says, I can blow so hard, I'll blow that coat right off of them. And the sun says, okay, go ahead, and blows harder and harder. And the person just pulls their coat tighter and tighter. But then the sun just brightens the day and the person takes their coat off and relaxes and enjoys the beautiful weather. And I try to think, in any of our buildings, we've got people that are exceeding expectations and people that are, let's say, on their way to meeting expectations. And we got to help them along that journey. If I'm shoving them down the road, they're going to trip and fall. If I'm helping them down the road, if I'm encouraging them down the road, and I reflect on that a lot. Those same people, if I cross paths with them, I'll be very humble and say, hey, if I could do it again, I would redo our relationship. I'd hit the reset button on that, and I hope that you see that. And I would want them to know I learned a lot from that, even if it didn't feel good to them in that moment. It taught me a lot about how to be a better leader, of learning what not to do again.
Beautiful. What a great reflection. It reminded me at some point there was let's call it supervisor, and there were two sub supervisors, and the supervisor told us, he pointed at me, you are going to be a bad guy. And then they pointed at them, you're going to be good guy. And like you just said, you take it literally.
Yeah.
In my case, I was just beginning my admin career, and you think, oh, this is the way you do it, right?
Yeah.
So absolutely, if I could go back, I would have done it differently. But it is through those experiences that you become who you are. So that's part of life, and you can only learn from it, rather than just saying, I'm such a miserable person. Is you do what you're asked to do.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Christopher. So let's talk about books. As you know, reading is a luxury. If you have to gift two books to a loved one, a fiction and a nonfiction, which books will those be?
Fiction, I'll be honest, I struggle with this one only because it's been a while since I've read a good fiction book. What I love about a good fiction book is something that's close to reality for me. When I'm watching TV, I'll watch anything. I'll watch those like Scandinavian murder shows. It's just escapism at its best. Or a Ted Lasso, like inspiring television show. But I'd say if I'm picking any book and recommending it to someone, it's probably something like a sports, semi-fictionalized book that feels close enough to reality that it's believable to me. But it is also fictionalized, and it'll hopefully have like some type of lesson that relates to a passion of mine. And then I would recommend it to someone else as almost like a book like Life of Pi would be a good example, right? It's fictionalized, but I look at that as like kind of a metaphor for like religion, spiritualism. So I think that would be a good, and I've actually recommended that to a lot of people. Nonfiction book, I just naturally gravitate towards the work we do, and not like directly applicable like lesson planning and things like that. But the book by Robert Evans, The Human Side of Change, I think was kind of like a lot we've been talking about, a very reflective book on how to build coalition, and not a very strategic book, but just a very mind-opening aha moment kind of book around how people buy into the work that needs to happen. And it's specifically for school leaders, but I think a lot of it is transferable in other places where your product you're developing is not capitalism driven, it's humanistic, like we do in schools, right? We're not building widgets to be sold. We're building the future. We're supporting the growth of tiny human beings, right? So I think those would be
Beautiful.
my top two.
Beautiful. Oh my goodness. Now that you say capitalism, I recently read a book titled Sapiens by it's a Jewish writer, Javal something Coates. It's like a very long name, but it talks about that capitalism is a imaginary system where people society have gotten used to work with, like we have the assumption that money has this value and therefore we have to believe in that, and he compares that to political system and religions and how sapiens have humans have evolved through time through symbols. In other words, we can get to believe in anything. But anyways, that's a
Yeah,
tangent.
interesting.
It just nonfiction books can be as fascinating as
Yeah,
fiction books too.
yeah.
Beautiful, thank you. I appreciate it. So, who is or who are your biggest influences?
Yeah, I I mean, I think in the real world, or at least outside of like personal relationships, I would say someone like I'm a sports lover. I mean, you could put on cricket, highlight, like any sport that's not even a major American sport, and I'm excited. You know, I might. I'm going on vacation soon, as we all should be, taking our self care. And I
Absolutely.
found a rugby tournament where I'm going to, and I don't even know the exact rules of rugby. I kind of get the gist of it. You know, it's a little bit like American football, but I'm excited just to go see a live sport in another country. So I'd say fictionalized or real world that I don't have a direct connection with, like people I've never met. I'd say, like I mentioned earlier, Ted Lasso. Yes, fictional, but fictional still inspired by a lot of reality and kind of an amalgamation of a lot of amazing sports coaches. Jason Sudeikis' character and many of the other characters on that show. I love how that show expanded to be very multi-perspective, a cast of characters leading in their own ways. But then from real world, I'm from the state of Michigan. So Jim Harbaugh, who was Michigan's football coach, and they just won the national championship. I aspire to be a lot like him. And then also in a very gritty way, what was his phrase? We're going to bite him in the kneecaps. Dan Campbell, the coach of the Detroit Lions. What I love about all of them is they inspire their players to be better people and play for them, not just for them as an individual, but inspired to play with purpose, with passion, with intensity. And when you watch any of those teams, yes, a fictional soccer team or two real world football teams, you see a level of excitement, and it kind of just gets you energized as a viewer watching the human stories or just watching them on the field. I think in real life, I would just add like personal relationships. Any leader that I've been able to work with and follow, and I can name two: Dashe Rowland, my successor at LaSalle, and Cindy Wolbert, who was my mentor principal when I was a resident principal about 11 years ago. Who they have many skills and many strengths as a leader, but their core strength that they lead with, and it's very evident, they wear it on their sleeve, is their empathy lens, and they're leading with heart. And I think that I never used to value that as like the greatest strength of all. But when you lead with that, what's that phrase? People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And
Amen.
those are the kind who there's an aura about them, like a warmth and a love. And when you feel that, it's authentic, right? It's not faked. It's not something taught in a book. And I think we all have that potential inside of us, but sometimes other things cloud that and get in the way. Like we've been talking about, some of the drive that we feel like it's necessary to drive towards outcomes, but you get more in the end. That African proverb of go fast, go alone, go slow, go farther, or go together, go farther. I forget the exact wording, right? But that's what I think about a lot now is we'll get there together if I take time to embody that passion that I think we all have, that I certainly do, to bring people along and build those deep relationships. So I'm so excited I've
Beautiful.
gotten to learn from them so intimately.
I absolutely love that you mentioned that you follow coaches. I think like any type of principal preparation should have lessons from coaches, right?
Yeah.
And the three examples that come: Pep Guardiola coaching Messi, Jose Mourinho coaching Ronaldo, and Phil Jackson coaching
Yeah.
Michael Jordan.
Yeah.
Like you don't teach those three how to play soccer better,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
often we become principals and we are told, or we come with the assumption that we have to be the best teacher in the building, right? And sometimes we have Michael Jordans in the building. We don't need to teach them, but we need to find something like, so for example, Phil Jackson, in the way he supported Jordan, is like how to best encourage a whole team to play together. It was not how to dunk or play or pass. It's how how what are the ways to inspire others. And in the Ted Lasso, when he's telling that I don't remember the name, but the very good player in the team who is very difficult, and he
Yeah.
tells him, "You are the best player, but if you play as a team member, oof,
Yeah.
everything that you can accomplish." Whoa,
Yeah.
that was a masterclass. And sometimes that's all we need to do.
Yeah.
Find that needle in the haystack that super esteemed teacher has not been able to find. And you say it is right there,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So amazing, beautiful. Thank you for sharing that, Christopher. Let's take a quick pause to praise the Teach Better community.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. Explore more podcasts at www.teachbetterpodcastnetwork.com. Now let's get back to the episode.
Okay, Christopher. So I'm sure you have at some points felt that you might not be good enough or not smart enough, et cetera, et cetera. How have you addressed imposter syndrome?
Yeah. That's a big challenge. I think I definitely feel that a lot. And I try to avoid like binaries, right? Like a black and white, like, am I fake or am I real? Am I successful or am I not? I try to just live in a space of looking at everything. So like, for example, right now we take the My Voice, My School survey. And we got good results. One of the categories on there, it's a survey that, for those that may not know, staff take it and students take it and your community takes it. And there are 5 different categories: involved families, supportive environment for students. And one of the categories is effective leaders. And it can be easy to get really fixated on what the answers are on that. And I actually, when the results came out a few days ago, I'm always in text message threads with other principals. And I said something to all my other principal friends: hey, the results are out. Remember, don't take it too hard on yourself, because I know how, and a whole little rant about, like, the good work you're doing. There are ways to lean in on these results and learn from them. But I know it can really mess with our heads because it's a very vulnerable thing. It's very public too. It gets published publicly. And I always think of our jobs like any politician. You're always going to have people that support you and people who may not agree with decisions you make. We're not in this to be liked. We're doing this work to have an impact on the lives of students and our staff. And sometimes the decisions we make have to be difficult. So like, our results on there were good this year, and I'm really proud of that. But I've also had years where it was really, really tough, really critical feedback. And I had to try to do a little bit of both ends of the spectrum of, okay, I can't deny this stuff. If I deny it, nothing's ever going to improve, right? That definition of insanity: do the same thing again and again and expect different outcomes. So how can I do something differently? Listening tours, getting my assistant principal to kind of get feedback. So it's like a layer removed where they might tell her and then she can filter it to me. But also, if I just do that and live in that imposter syndrome, where not just imposter syndrome, but like the evidence telling me that things aren't going well in certain domains, that can be very, very crippling. And then I'm not going to be effective. I'm never going to grow from it because I'm just going to sit in those emotions. And that affects me. I think it affects a lot of people. So I try to like live in that space. Okay, I'm taking, I've said to my staff at the end of certain years, I'm going to go home and reflect on how to be a better leader for you next year. And I hope that you give me a shot at trying to be a better person. And I can see like heads nodding, like, oh, wow, that was really, and I mean that. And I think they can tell it comes from the heart. And I think for our own mental sanity and wellness, we also have to reflect on there are literally children skipping down the hallways with joy. And I helped foster that environment. And what are the other victories? I think it's very important for us to reflect at the end of each year and literally write them down. I have a notepad sitting on my dresser in my like one of our bedrooms here, where I've just written down certain things I've accomplished. It is not an ego thing. I don't put that out publicly, but it's a reminder to myself sometimes when I get down on myself of like, dang it, I think I offended one of my teachers. I said something I didn't mean to. And even if I apologize to them, I don't know if they're going to accept that. But then I go back to that list and I go, yes, that is true. And all these other things too. And I think we just have to live in a space as leaders where we make 1,000 decisions a day. We walk from one end of our building to another. And it's like, we're in such an amazing space where we can directly impact children and our staff every day. But we're going to make a lot of wrong decisions or questionable decisions every single day. And we can't beat ourselves up about that, or then we are not going to be effective because we get crippled in that doubt and that just that self-criticism.
What a great reflection. Thank you. The 5 essentials can be definitely, it can be a source of feeling great or a source of feeling shame if it comes down, right? And my assistant principal is becoming a principal now in the fall.
Awesome.
And I told her, most days you are going to feel like half of your day you are disappointing people, and half of the day people are going to be disappointing you. And if you cannot live with that, don't be a principal. Because that's what the job entails. And you have to be happy with that, and you have to know that that's what the job is. Thank you, Christopher. I appreciate it. So let's talk about productivity. Being successful includes being on top of our productivity. I know you and I know many individuals who are like so smart. They can quote you any research. They are amazing. So often they work in central office because they cannot work with people. They are like brains. But working in a school, you have to be on top of your productivity. So let's get very geeky. Tell us about your email, calendar, and to-do list strategy. What do you do?
Well, you can probably see me smiling. This is like my bread and butter, something I love to tinker with. It's an ongoing evolution, I think, for all of us. But I have a lot of, we call them sometimes hacks or tips and tricks. And I've taught a couple different courses on this. I've taught in the Summer Leadership Institute, like professional development for all principals within inside our district. I've taught some courses on like tips and tricks for like emails and things like that. And then I also teach Illinois Administrators Association state-approved course on data analysis, which ties into a lot of the same. And it's what I oftentimes write about on my Substack and my blog. So like, I'll give a few concrete examples. My inbox is, I never end the day with more than like 5 or so emails. And then I have a few strategies I use to stay on top of my emails, my to-do list, everything. And before even diving in on a couple concrete examples, the overarching philosophy that I try to embody is follow through and accountability. If I say something and I don't follow through on it, then who am I, right? I'm not going to be trusted at my word. And I think I have this philosophy that everyone is either a 98%, an 85%, or a 60%. We should all aspire to be a 98%. 98% follow through on the things we do. Nobody's perfect. Don't strive for perfection, right? Because it's unrealistic. And then we got our 85% of folks where in our buildings where I need to check in on them every once in a while. Hey, by the end of the day, can you give me an update on so-and-so? And I just like to say, I just need to be in the loop because I trust people, but we are accountable at the end of the day. And then there's the 60% of people where it's just, maybe they're overwhelmed, drinking from a fire hose. We really need to support them because 60% is going to lose a lot of trust from their role. So a couple of hacks I use. I have a good to-do list that crosses platforms and I put things on it. But a more unique thing that I do, I use Boomerang for Gmail and Follow Up Then. And they're both kind of like two sides of the same coin. What I do is, you know how like when you send an email from Gmail, if you don't get a response in 3 days or so, it'll kind of tell you no one responded. Well, that's nice, but there are so many facets to that. For example, what if I send an email blind copied to my whole staff and say, hey, everybody, please respond to this if you're interested in such and such. Well, now they're going to respond, but I want to give that like 3 or 4 days for people to respond. And then I want to do something about it. So with Boomerang, which it's like, I think $50 a year, not much. I can schedule it to return to my inbox in 3 days. So now I send it and I just let it go. I archive it. I never delete emails. I just archive them because then you can search for them later. But then 3 days later, it's going to pop back into my inbox. And when I look at it and I go, what's this email? Oh, this is that one I sent where I was expecting responses. Now I can look at each person's response and go, okay, these are the people interested. Now let me email them. I'll never forget it because it comes back into my email. One more example with that same type of feature of Boomerang. Sometimes you get an email in the middle of the day and you're like, this is important, but not urgent. I can't deal with it right now at 1:15 p.m. when there are hundreds of people running around this building. I can get to this at my quiet time. And what's my quiet time? For me, it's 5 a.m. I'm an early riser. So I Boomerang things to hit my inbox at 5 a.m. So literally every single day I get like a small flood of emails, maybe 5 to 10 that hit my inbox. And when the world is quiet and I'm like on an elliptical machine at the gym or wherever, I can go, oh, that email. Now I have the headspace. No one's going to interrupt me while I read this email and I can give a very thoughtful response to it. And once again, it never slips through the crack because I've scheduled it to hit my inbox and I'm going to respond. And so then, yeah, I might start the day with like 15, 20 emails in my inbox because a few bounced in there, but then I chip away at those. And then if I don't get to something, I just Boomerang it to the next morning and make sure that I didn't wait too long on it. So I probably got 8 or 10 more little examples of things that I'm always trying to think like, is there a better way to do this? Because I'm wasting too much time on this. I bet there's a better way. Let me like Google it, or now we can just ask ChatGPT, how could I do this better? Yes. And I'm constantly trying to do that because we call it sometimes like clawing back time. And we can easily put in 60, 70 hours a week in this job, if not more. So if I can claw back a little more, it's for maybe something else productive or mental health or family time or hobbies. So
beautiful. Thank you so much, Boomerang. What a great tool. Yeah. Tell us about your calendar experience. How do you schedule your week, your month, your day? What lessons can we learn from you?
Yeah, I try to be very intentional with my calendar. And I have Apple Watch with alerts that go off, and because I say it to my staff, I'm very forgetful. You tell me, and I'm very likely going to forget. That's how I hold myself accountable. I'll walk past somebody in the hallway, and they say, "Oh, can you meet with me during my prep today?" And I go, "Yeah, send me an email, or send me a text message to remind me, or send me a calendar alert." I also know they may not, right? If I say that to 10 people, maybe 5 will, 5 won't. So I still add it to my own calendar or to-do list while I'm walking down the hallway. Boop, on my calendar, alert set. But one thing I like to do, I think we all do a lot of things like our schedules can be so messy. I mean, you look at our calendars and there's like multiple calendars on our calendars that are shared with us of things we got to go to. So I'll send people a calendar invite as I'm sending them an email and say, let me know if that time doesn't work. Because now it's held on both of our calendars. That could be one of my staff members. It could be, the state senator that we've been meaning to catch up on. Great. Okay. You said next Tuesday works. I sent you an invite for 1:15 p.m. If that time doesn't work for you, just let me know. Because now I'm not going back and forth, trying to find a time. Like I put a placeholder. And if it works, great. Now I don't even, and they respond and say, that time works for me. And they accept the invite. I don't even need to respond at that point. Like we've locked in the time. But sometimes we can drown ourselves with all this back and forth, unless we have something like Calendly, or Boomerang actually does have a calendaring feature. If you're saying for like interviews, pick one of the following times, and then someone picks it and then it disappears, and someone picks another one and it disappears. So I'm always trying to be strategic like that. The last thing I'll add that's really, really important, I I try to think about my day of like, when should certain things happen? Getting into classrooms has to happen between 8 to 3, right? That's when the kids are there. So I have an out of office response that goes out. And I mean, you could shoot me an email and you'll see it at my CPS email, not my personal one, right? And it says, during the hours of 8 to 3, I prioritize staff and students. So I'm with few exceptions, I'm unable to take meetings. I will take a meeting if I need to, but I try to avoid it. Whereas teacher observation feedback, where I have to like really focus in on, okay, this is the evidence. What feedback do I want to give this teacher? I do that 5 p.m. or so, when the building has gotten quiet and I can just wrap my mind around 1 or 2 teachers for the day and give them a thoughtful response. I can't do that in the middle of the day. Someone's going to interrupt me. So I try to book time on my calendar, classrooms, so I can get into classrooms and be with staff and students every single day. And then I book time after school, we call them reach observations, the teacher observations. So do I always hit it? No, but if it's on there every single day, it's a placeholder where I can go, okay, yep, now is that dedicated time. It's also a cognitive thing. So I'm not feeling like I have all these things to do. Yeah. And I'm going to do them at this time on my calendar.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. Tomorrow's episode is with a guy from Kentucky. It's only about AI in school leadership. But I know that in your Substack and your post, you have talked a lot about how artificial intelligence can empower the school leader. Can you walk us through that journey, some of the lessons that you have learned, and what should we know?
Yeah. There's so many things to say, of course. So I'll start with this and then we'll focus in. When people talk about artificial intelligence, I say it's like saying the internet. Like, oh, I use the internet. I don't, like, everyone uses the internet, right? It's up until 30 years ago, or for the past 30 years, it's become more and more ubiquitous, right? It's in every aspect of our lives, right? AI is going to be the same thing. When we talk about AI in schools right now, we're oftentimes talking about plagiarism, or artificial intelligence generated lesson planning, something like that. Those are their own avenues to go down. And I introduce those concepts to my teachers during professional development. We'll do like a couple of my teacher leaders and I that are passionate about what artificial intelligence can do. Like I'll give them like 15 minutes, say, okay, everybody pull out your phone and try this. And, people make a little image generation that's kind of silly just to see what's out there. I want people at least aware. But what I'm really focused on as a school leader is 2 things. One, we have a lot of languages spoken, and I love in the newest feature of the newest version of ChatGPT 4.0, you can say, hey, ChatGPT, I'm talking with a parent who only speaks Arabic. Help me translate my conversation back and forth from English to Arabic, Arabic to English when I say go. And it'll say, I'm ready when you are. Say go. I say, go. Hello, Ms. Al-Mashal. I'm excited to talk to you today about how Omar is progressing in class, blah, 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 right? You keep going. It'll voice translate back. And that's in everyone's pocket instead of these fancy translation devices, which most schools have with needs like ours. So I'm going to teach my staff that next week. And I'm going to say, over the summer, try it out. When you go to the grocery store, when you go to your dry cleaner, if there's somebody that speaks another language, but they also speak English, challenge yourself to meet them where they're at. Don't force them to speak English like us. You work on, because they'll feel that empathy of like, you met me halfway, we're building bridges now. And I've noticed that in my own community whenever we have parent meetings. The other aspect of using ChatGPT in our daily lives is we've been doing this for about 10 to 15 years with adaptive learning, we call it, where student gets an answer right, it gives them a more challenging task. They get something wrong, they get an easier task, right? It kind of levels them out and provides them with instruction at their level. But think of how, like, I don't think artificial intelligence is ever going to replace teachers, but like in so many other fields, there will be teachers who use it and teachers who don't. And if we use it and we're consulting with it within some type of software program curricula, we can say, hey, chatbot, what insight are you getting from how my students are performing right now? And it might have a camera that watches students or a microphone that listens, but it probably also has some data from what students are typing into their computers or some type of software program they're using for math or literacy or something. And to have that thought partner, not just about theoretical, well, if my students are struggling, what should I do? But okay, 42% of your students have mastered this skill, but 58% have not. Of those 58%, here's what I am noticing as a bot looking at the research. And you get to go, okay, that's great. You don't know the kids like I know the kids. So I'm going to take all that information. It informs me, and I'm going to make a decision as a teacher based on that. And the best part is we're not waiting like 3 weeks like we did in the old school days. You teach, quiz, and then test. Now we're doing like that could be within a lesson. Something pops up on the screen and says, based on the first 15 minutes of your lesson, try this next. Here are some options of where to go next. And you go, okay, I'm not going to do any of those, but that gave me an idea of what to do that I know as a teacher with a strong background, where to go next. And that like rapid fire is something I'm really excited about. And it's just going to get better and better and better.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Recently I learned from someone, the person put this spreadsheet with all this data, and the person asked ChatGPT, do a SWOT analysis of the data here, and for that data, create SMART goals for and something that will take the bulk of the work. It will simplify it so you can actually do the work. So it's quite fascinating, and I agree with you. It's going to be something just like the internet at some point. Thank you so much, Christopher. Amazing. So let's talk about a little bit about writing. Going back to your doctoral dissertation, for those who are in the trenches, perhaps starting to write their dissertations, and you think that's going to be the work of your life, and then you realize it's just 8 papers. If you think about it, what advice do you have for those who are going to write their dissertations?
Yeah, I think first off, everyone needs like a rhythm, right? I wasn't raising young children when I was writing my dissertation. That can be sometimes the biggest hurdle that sometimes people feel, is like how life can get in the way. And it certainly does for anyone. But so you have to find your structure, right? For me, it was Saturdays. I had already been doing doctoral classes on Friday evenings, and Saturdays is when my courses were. So I just worked with my wife and said, okay, certain Saturdays, let's just schedule the time where you're doing whatever you need to, and I'm going to just focus in on this. And I get up at 5 a.m. 7 days a week. So I'd get up, work till noon or 1 p.m. and then pause for the day, and we'd go spend the rest of the day together. So I had that kind of cadence. I couldn't do it like during the week. My brain cognitively was focused on too much day-to-day work. And then over breaks, I'd work some and got it done. But I think that was my cadence, my structure. But I think the way to envision it so it doesn't seem daunting is it's like like eating an elephant, right? You take one bite at a time. And what's exciting is you follow your passion when you're writing a dissertation, right? You're not, sometimes a master's thesis could feel like you're writing it for someone else, that your professors are kind of coaching you on how to write a big paper. So they tell you like, well, maybe you should focus on this. With a dissertation, like I think any good program, like what is it your passion? And you think of the arena, the section, and the seat. And it's something like in our program, it was meant to be contributing to the body of research. In some programs, it's a problem of practice of yours. Either way, it's something you're passionate about. And when you're passionate about it, like think of how this progresses. You read one article and you're like, yeah, I'm fired up. I want to write about that. So then you read 5 more articles about that. And then in the reference section of those 5 articles, you're reading like 5 more articles. Well, right there, there's so much that you've just absorbed. Write about it. Even if it's just chicken scratch nonsense, write. What am I reading? And you write from your perspective. You are now the expert on this topic by the time you're done with the paper. So write that way. Don't say this author said this author. Nope. This is what happened. This is what works. Speak with authority and then cite those people to back you up. And then you start to realize, I just wrote 5 pages. Okay. Then the next day, wow, I'm reading, I'm absorbing, I'm learning, and I wrote 5 more pages. Well, then after a couple of weeks of doing that, you got 20 pages. If you just did a couple of days here and there of a couple of hours, and it might be a bunch of jargon that you don't even buy into anymore, but you just keep doing that and you keep getting more. And then you go and you revise, you read it, you say, oh, I get what I was getting at. Let me tweak it. And now you've got like 35 really good pages. And that 35 good pages is probably a chapter and a half. And then you start to feel like, okay, I got a chapter and a half done. Like you start to feel like you're building some momentum. So you can't think of it as like 200 pages. It's okay. Can I do 5 pages today? Just get it out there,
Beautiful.
get some content, things like that.
Great advice. You know, Christopher, I admire people like you that in addition of your labor of love, you share your lessons and you have these substacks with all these articles and things that support other school leaders. Tell
Yeah.
us about that journey. What makes you work on this when you can be just keeping it for yourself? Tell us about that.
Yeah, I think the primary mission behind it is I think we all get into this profession for slightly different reasons, but for largely the same of we want to make an impact on the lives of children, right? I always say like if we wanted to get paid more, we'd probably have a different job. If we wanted to have a punch in, punch out 9 to 5 job, we would definitely have a different job. Like we take our work home with us and we're passionate about it. And I go back to when I was a teacher. When I was a teacher, I saw the world burning around me and I thought, I can do great things for these kids, but I can't really affect much in the outside world. I can be a teacher leader and kind of influence, but if I'm a building leader, I can impact the whole school, every aspect of the leaky pipe. I have some say so in. And now I think, okay, well, now that I'm a building leader, I love my job. It comes with a lot of stress and pressure and accountability, but I love it. I take all that and I'm passionate about it. But I also think, well, I still see the world burning around me. And so I'm involved in politics. Oftentimes I've done leadership cohorts outside of the school building. And I think it makes me a better leader when I'm learning from others. And if I'm taking so much and I'm impacting students, I want to give. I want to give because it also helps build relationships, right? It's not just consuming. Relationships are a two-way street. So if I'm watching your podcasts like I do, I'm learning something. Well, how can I either pay that forward and do something with it or respond to? So I've reached out to a few of your guests in the past and said, hey, I loved what you said on that podcast. Could we continue the discussion? Are you open to a cup of coffee? Because then we can go back and forth in a great dialogue and maybe give each other some good ideas. But that's my primary mission. When I'm writing, when I'm putting things out there and just engaging with people, it's to build a sense of connection. And I think, whether any of us ever make money or get notoriety or for any of this stuff, like that's not what it's about. I love that when people read something I've posted and then engage with me in some way. It could be 1 or 2 people. Like, I love what you wrote about this. Hey, awesome. So it could be a person I've never met. Hey, you ever want to hop on a call? It might be while we're commuting or on a Saturday like this. And we just engage in rich discussion. And then I'm 100% of the time, I'm going back to my building and going, I learned something new that I get to use and it'll impact kids. And it just feels so good.
Wow. Thank you. I love that. One more question. You mentioned Admin Academy. I have thought a long time about doing it, but I haven't had the guts to pursue it. Tell us about your experience and what advice do you have for those who might want to say, oh, I have nothing else to do. Let me do something else. What advice do you have?
Yeah. So specifically the Aspiring Superintendents Academy in here in Illinois. Big shout out to Mike Lubefeld, Nick Polyak, Courtney Orzel, three amazing mentors in that program. I think kind of like teacher leaders who get a principal license. Oftentimes, everyone has different rationale as to why, but oftentimes it's, hey, whether I want that or not, I want to know more about that, develop some skills for that, and get some insight into, is that a role I want? And I look at this as very much the same. I've had a superintendent license for 5 or 6 years. And yeah, I would love to feel that I'm ready for and excited for a superintendency someday. I love where I'm at now, and I don't want to leave my school anytime soon. But I had gone to like a 1-day training through ISB that kind of whet my appetite for doing the academy. And I loved it. I thought it was, I've heard of a lot of other people like me who said it was an amazing experience. I learned so much from it. I do. I have so many resources. I have connections with people. I have a better insight into how the principalship and other central office positions work out in the suburbs that I would otherwise have not known, because CPS can feel like a black hole. We do so much. We're bigger than most states. But two things that they talk about in that week-long intensive. They say, we want you to develop some skills that you can use when you're being a principal or a superintendent, like introducing yourself to your community for your first time as superintendent, negotiating with your board on important topics. And they bring in board members from boards of education to kind of mentor you and coach you and ask some deep questions. Handling difficult situations like staff discipline. And you do a lot of like hour-long workshops on this where you're doing projects. Okay, so if you're in this situation, role play it. And it's kind of uncomfortable at times, and it's meant to shake you up. And then the second objective in the training is, do you really want this job? And I think you'll see this if you ever go through it. The most emotionally challenging part of it is they bring in multiple superintendents who have all had the same trajectory. They became a superintendent. Times got really tough for whatever reason. Everyone has their own story and they tell you it, but they're coming in to talk to you because they've come out on the other side accomplishing amazing things. And so you inevitably go into it like, oh, I'm so excited to meet this person. And then 15 minutes in, you're like, I don't know. I don't ever want to go through that. But then when they come out of it, you go, you know what? That's difficult leadership sometimes. Sometimes you're going to get those pitchforks chasing you down the road, and you either lean in on it and go, we're going to get through this. We're going to tough this out. It's a difficult time in this community. Or you say, you know what? I've done my part here. I've followed my passion and really tried to make an impact. And I'm going to go take my talents elsewhere into possibly the same role. Like they have been superintendent in multiple places, some of these guests, but it was really eye-opening, really personal, and really, it didn't feel like coursework. It felt like really deep skill development. And I endorse it to anyone if you're aspiring to be a superintendent or really trying to develop the kind of skills that go beyond the principalship skills.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Christopher. And finally, when you take out the hat of school leader, inspirational figure, sharer of knowledge, what do you do for fun?
I've grappled with that some recently. Like, what is my identity outside the principalship? Because I think we give so much to it. But first and foremost, my wife and I have been married over 10 years. We have a little family place in Southwest Michigan we go to on most weekends. We do a lot of fix-up jobs in that place, and then the family kind of gathers there every once in a while. It's nice in the St. Joseph, Benton Harbor area. We get to go out to the beach some, so it's just kind of like off the grid feeling, and it's nice to just kind of have that psychological escape. We also have two dogs, a French bulldog and a greyhound, and we do a lot of dog volunteering. So we've fostered dogs. My wife especially, she's like the expert on everything with our dogs, but I do a lot as well. And we have a sick dog downstairs I'm going to go take care of in a minute. But beyond that, I love networking. I was a part of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, one of their leadership programs a couple of years ago. And yes, it's tied to our profession, but there's enough distance where I don't feel like I'm in principal mode. I just feel like I'm a passionate adult about international affairs and global affairs of different kinds. And then I'm in a room of people who aren't school leaders. They might be an engineer, an environmental consultant. And I just get to network and be in this space where we're all passionate about the same things. And so it doesn't feel like work. It just feels like social networking. Have a glass of wine and a slice of pizza and just engage with people, listen to some guest speaker. And it's following a passion that's not exactly our day-to-day work, but it still also benefits the day-to-day work when I learn about how some of these important global topics impact us in the schools with like funding and municipalities and civic leadership. So
beautiful. That sounds like a lot of fun, especially going away with the wife and the dogs to disconnect from the world. What a great rejuvenation strategy. Beautiful. Yeah. Christopher, it has been such a luxury and pleasure having you on the show. Any last words for the listeners and viewers of the show?
Yeah, I'll say this, for those of you that haven't finished your school year yet, we have 4 days to go here in Chicago. I just read an awesome article on Substack about who's on your ship and who's ready to jump ship, so to speak. Like, and it was a, whole story of like pirates and how when they dock at a bay, some of their crew would get off and leave and never come back. And it's the same with us. We may have some staff who are okay with moving on for different reasons. I mean, at the end of the day, I love my staff, and our job is to support students. And we have to make sure that that's in our heart, that's at our core. It's not just a job, right? It's a job that has very, very important outcomes. But I've been really reflecting recently, and I've been working on it and just revising on what is my end of year message to my staff. So on Thursday's our last day of school. On Wednesday afternoon, I've asked my staff to gather for our end of year message. It's not required. We don't have like a union negotiated time. I'm just saying, I'd like everyone to get together, and I would like you to. Like, why would you not? We're going to do like a little cupcake celebration. We're going to give a shout out to our people that we know are not coming back because they're retiring or moving out of state. But what is that message you say to your staff at the end of the year? What do they need to hear? And I try to think of it from their perspective. What do they need to hear? Not what do I need to tell them? What do they need to hear, want to hear? What would they love to hear? And I always say to my staff, I've said this since the day I met them at the beginning of the year. I met some of them over the summer. What I care most about is that feeling on a Sunday night or on the morning of work when you're getting in your car, walking to work, taking transit to work, riding a bike, whatever, that you feel respected, valued, and appreciated here. If you feel that way, that's what I should do to take care of you. And you then carry that forward and do good work for students. If you don't, I haven't done my job well enough. And so I'm trying to think, if that was how I started the year, how do I end the year? How do I hit on that? Plus a few accountability points that people want me to hit. They say, you need to be about accountability. Okay, great. And how do I say that in a way that people need to feel and not feel managed, but feel led? And what's the future going to look like, right? Where are we going? What's our vision, our mission? Not what's on the website. Everybody has a vision and mission statement on the website, but what do people need to hear about where we're taking this ship in the future? Where are we going to turn to? What's our next year, next 5 years going to look like? So I want people going into the summer, taking a break, going to some beach somewhere, but also going, I'm excited for next year. We got some good stuff on the horizon. And he's not selling us on a story. This feels real, and I'm excited for it. That's what I'm trying to hit. And I encourage anybody, if you have that critical opportunity, maybe next year instead, but try to hit on that, because people are going to leave and they might jump off the ship if you haven't really hit them in their heart in a way that they need to feel.
There you go. Masterclass, Dr. Christopher Graves. Thank you so much. Have a fantastic weekend.
Thanks. You too. Thanks for this opportunity.
Thank you for listening to Wisdom and Productivity, the podcast of Dr. Efraín Martinez.
Chulo.
And I love that production. Chulo out.